Welcome to Martini Time. Beautiful day here in Blackstone, the center of the world, but then you too are at the center of the world. So what's in the news? I was just watching Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor today talking about the current situation with Kavanaugh. And I've also been reading an old book of mine, The Battle for God, History of Fundamentalism by Karen Armstrong. So I'm kind of like getting reinvigorated or revisiting fundamentalism in the modern world. And I keep writing about this in different ways all the time. But the fact of our current historical situation that is so confusing comes from the fact that in the 90s and in the 90s the Republican Party married the fundamentalists or the Evangelicals and put mythos, religious mythology, religious values together with secular values. So they are merged, kind of like you have an overlay, like you have a ground of a terrain, a map, and you overlay a plastic streets or cities or whatever names. So there's an overlay of Christian mythology, Christian values, the biblical story of the world as a battle between good and evil, this cosmic battle of good versus evil, and that Christ will come, and when there is Armageddon, when the Jews return to the Holy Land, then the Christ will return, and of course, unfortunately, the Jews all get destroyed, but the saved will rise in a rapture to heaven. And the rest of these secular modernist liberals will all go to hell. That's kind of like the basic idea. But it's apocalyptic. It frames history in the terms of the end of time is coming. See, now fundamentalism runs on the end of time. Every now a new prophet comes up and says the time will end, yada, yada, yada. I found it in the Bible. It doesn't end. So, oh well, it's still coming. So it's all end of time is always coming. Now we have Fox News, which is kind of like a theocratic news program that delivers news with a sense of dread. And it pictures the world in a cosmic war between the right and the left, with liberals being evil, satanic, run by Obama and George Soros, and the right being moral, patriotic, and they have a savior, a messiah, called Trump. So I constantly see connecting these two dots of this biblical story of the end of times, this eschatological view of history with Armageddon and the rapture and all that, superimposed over our politics. And you can see it right here, so evident, in that like this November election is kind of like being framed now as an Armageddon, a final battle between the left and the right, with the liberals being the evil, the axis of evil. Even Kavanaugh said that. He said this is all set up by the evil Democrats. You go on Facebook, liberalism to the right, to the conservatives, is absolute evil. There's no compromise with that. It's liberalism is secular, rational, scientific materialism that has erased God from the map, you see. This is the Enlightenment. This has been our civilization for 400 years. And there's always been a contest and a reaction by fundamentalists who want to put God back on the map to the secular rationalists who say you can't have God on a secular map. You can't have God in the courtroom. You can't have God in the schools. You can't have God in public spaces unless you let all the gods in. And also, secular humanism, the value of secular humanism is equality. So you have the equality of first women, then blacks, then gays, and the fundamentalist, secularist says, well, that's not in the Constitution, that's not in the Bible, so you can't have those rights. They disturb the status quo. They disturb God's creation. It's fixed. But secular humanism says evolution, it's not fixed. It's evolving. The fundamentalists say, yes, it is fixed. So what is it? Is it fixed, or is reality changing? So this is the battle between a fixed view of life, which establishes me in a particular position of power, privilege, if I'm a white male. So I don't want to lose my power, my privilege, which has been the way my father and the grandfathers and all the grandfathers lived, you see. Father knows best. But this is all under attack by the rising power of women, by the rising power of new citizens who are claiming their rights, like gay people. That's a new citizen. Gay people never had identity before now. They were always in the closet. Suddenly, I'm here and I'm queer. I want my rights. I want to get married too. What? That's not in the Constitution. You can't interpret the Constitution liberally. It's got to be fixed. Literal interpretation of the Bible and the Constitution is fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is the literal interpretation of the Bible as factual history. Before fundamentalism, the Bible was interpreted metaphorically, like art. And metaphorically to my personal inner life, not a fact of history. So fundamentalism is new. It rose with modernity. It's not something that has always existed. It's a product of the modern secular state that removed God from the world, you see. But we have to and this is a dilemma. We have to have meaning and purpose, and religion gives us meaning and purpose. Science doesn't. What does the consumer culture that we live in America gives us many good things, but it also creates the ego. The ego isn't created by modern culture. It's a view from the outside. It's a view that looks upon experience, and the world is objective. But that ego is a point of view, is a viewpoint. It doesn't really exist. That's what non-duality and all this spiritual stuff is about. The ego doesn't exist as a thing. You can't find it. It exists as a viewpoint, culturally created, so you can catch a bus and make stuff. But it gives no meaning. So the ego has to have meaning. So what does the ego do in a consumer culture? It has to belong to something that gives it meaning. So the ego in the consumer culture belongs to wealth, fame, status, if you're wealthy. If you're not, you belong to a brand. You identify with a sports team. You identify with Nike or some fashion. You identify as a biker. You identify with subcultures. But these subcultures exist within the larger culture. But a subculture is a culture with which you can identify your ego with and say, I'm a biker, and I identify with the biker mythos. I'm a wild one. And you look like it. You get on the bike and you're in a tribe. That's your identity. So these are all kinds of subcultures that the ego can identify with in order to affirm its existence, because by itself it doesn't exist. By itself, a acculturated ego by itself does not exist. So it has to bond with something. And now it's bonded with politics. Politics, thanks to Newt Gingrich and the conservative right, the right wing, has made a political party an ideology. Now, an ideology is what you give your identity to. So you just see the world through the ideology. And the ideology with the mythos of the apocalyptic story of the end of time, you see, and the Savior who's coming, was a ready-made formula for Trump to descend from the elevator as the Savior. So it doesn't matter what he does, you see. The Savior can do what he wants. He makes the law. You see? The Savior, Jesus, is above the law. The Pope is above the law. The Pope is infallible. The President is infallible. Trump's infallible. But that's seeing it through the eyes of the mythos, not the actual practical logic of the secular rational world, which sees him as a con man. So, is he a con man or a savior? Depends on which lens you put on. So I could see Mitch McConnell framing the world and this coming election as a Armageddon, the final battle of good and evil for the soul of America. And Kavanaugh, is our icon. He's our flag that the right will carry to the battle against the enemies of mankind, the liberals, the evil Democrats, you see. So Kavanaugh is now become a mythic saint, a battle cry. Kavanaugh, Kavanaugh. And all the practical, pragmatic business of appointing a person to the Supreme Court is lost. In previous times, he would have been dropped. He's got too much weight. Get another one. What difference does it make? Get another conservative. But now Kavanaugh is a cause. He's a cause. We will not surrender, says Kavanaugh. I will not be kicked out. I will not be forced out. This is a witch hunt. This is a crucifixion by the evil Democrats. Anyway, you know the story, but I just refer back to that if you try to understand this on the field of rational secularism, you won't understand it. You have to understand you have to have a reference to understand the right wing or the Republican Party. You have to understand it with one finger pointing to politics and the other finger pointing to mythology of the evangelical end of times and the rapture. Thanks for dropping in.